Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Today we're gonna talk about another extremely interesting and tricky line. I'm talking about Raptor Variation in Trompowsky Attack. I have already covered how to play Trompowsky in the channel, but this time instead of the main line we focus on an alternative. But you will see it is worth because the lines and the tricks are just amazing. So after d4, knight f6, and bishop g5, we have Trompowsky Attack here. The main line for black is going to be knight e4, and here the main line is going to be bishop f4, and we have already covered that in the channel. However, there is this alternative or side line we can call Raptor Variation with h4. There are some advantages of playing this line. I can highlight some things here. For example, it's a surprise for your opponent because, well, first of all, your opponent does not expect a Trompowsky Attack, and even less they expect a Raptor Variation in Trompowsky Attack. Secondly, it's a very creative and active play. In general, the middle game is going to be very dynamic and very interesting. Third, you can use the h-pawn later to create problems, and also the rook is going to be good over the h-file once you open the line. And finally, there are many traps and tricks. There are some specific positions here that our opponent could be got into, and they are like a minefield. I mean, it's hard to escape from them without falling for a trap. So once we play Raptor Variation, our opponent can play two main lines. They can try d5 or they can try c5. Well, if they play d5, we don't have too many traps, but we can get some interesting play. For example, we can play knight d2 here. We're inviting them to actually capture the bishop, because then the pawn, the h-pawn on the g file is going to be good. It's going to be controlling and getting space, but also the half open file is going to be very good for us. And if we can develop the bishop over d3, there is a coincidence here. So a lot of good things if they actually capture the bishop. Also, our knight from f3 is going to be protecting that pawn, so we are good. Well, that's the line with d5. We're not gonna talk too much about this line. The main line and probably the most played is going to be c5, and this is where we are gonna prepare some tricky ideas. Here, I like this move, d5. Here, there is this line of queen b6. Observe that in these lines where we develop the bishop early, very often they will try to target the weakness on b2. That's usually a way to refute or play against this early development. So this queen b6 is like probably one of the main ideas here for black, but this is actually what we want, and that's where we have many tricks. If they play something different like g6, well, we can play here like this move, really interesting, queen d3. One more time, making the knight take our bishop. Also, our queen is going to be very good here on d3. Observe that when the queen was on d1, when we developed the knight, the queen is going to be blocked over there. So this time is very different. The queen is already out. We can go, for example, to the king side, to the h file. I mean, over h3 or over h4, maybe, depending on what happens later. Our queen is much better. Our knight is going to be developed, and we are good. And our pieces are all making sense. So, for example, like knight takes bishop. Here we don't have to take directly. There is another exotic move here. Instead of h takes g5, we can play queen c3 in between. We are taking the rook. We are forcing the move f6, and now we can take the knight on g5. Black can play here bishop g7, just developing, and well, we just do the same thing like knight d2. d6 is normal here, and well, this normal development move knight h3 is very good. Observe the knight is coming over f4, is also guarding the pawn on g5. But the whole point of the knight over here is that you could be going to f4, and at some point you are controlling the weakness on e6. So this could be a plan, especially if you can trade the bishop on c8. The knight going to e6 is going to be really strong in these positions. But the lines where the board is going to be on fire is when black plays here queen b6, and this is going to be very interesting now, because we're not gonna defend that pawn. We're just gonna sacrifice that pawn in the opening, and there will be many tricky ideas and a lot of tactics that I want to show you because they're just amazing. So here we're just playing knight d2. One more time, we want black to capture the bishop on g5, and then h takes g5. By the way, we need to say that this knight takes g5 here is the most frequently played move in online blitz games. So very often they will take the bishop, and then you will recapture, of course, and then one more time the most played is queen takes b2, so usually they just accept the pawn. In general, black thinks here like, okay, I'm getting one pawn, my opponent is getting some compensation, but this is very playable. I mean, there's nothing like dangerous here. So in general, they might think that they can take the pawn on b2. However, the compensation white is getting here is much higher than it seems. In this position, we can play e4, just protecting our central pawn, controlling the center, but also, of course, developing our bishop. And after e4, black can play some moves. But this is already really, really tricky. I mean, here black can try like knight a6, like d6, but all these lines are decisive advantage for white. The only move keeping more or less equal is actually a little better for white middle game. It's going to be g6. And there is a deep idea behind this g6. And it is to clear g7 so the queen can go over there. Because in many of these lines, the queen is going to be trapped. With many tactics and tricks we are going to analyze, the queen is going to be a problem. So here, for example, rook b1, they should play queen g7. And this position is a little better for white. I mean, we have a compensation, but I mean, not like some compensation for the pawn, like a lot of compensation for the pawn. Observe that black pieces are in really bad positions. They are colliding with each other, and they are not making sense. So, I mean, for a pawn, this is a really good play, and also we have a lot of space all over the board. Well, that's if they play g6. Also, they can play here knight a6. It has already been played in Masters games, but here we are very well. We just take that knight, and after b takes a6, we play rook b1. Even if they capture that pawn on a2, there is a move I want to highlight in this position because it's a really special move. It's a really typical move for this Raptor variation, and it is this g6. Observe that after g6, black needs to capture with the f pawn, and the idea here is that we are disconnecting pawns in the center and also on the king side, and also we are creating weaknesses over here. So for example, after f takes g6, we can play knight gf3, and well, maybe the whole point here is that we want to play knight e5, queen f3, and queen f7. This looks like a really long plan, but there is not too much black can do to stop that plan. Observe that when you play knight e5, you're also taking the pawn on g6 because there is a pin over here. There's not too much they can do. They can try, for example, d6, but well, we don't go over e5, we go over g5 then. And again, we want to play queen f3, queen f7. The rook is on the open file, so even if the king tries to run a little, it's not going too far. And as you can imagine, this position is decisive advantage for white because the attack is going to be really strong in the next moves. So, you know, we already saw g6, it's probably the best move for black. Knight a6 is not getting too much, and then we're going to focus on d6. And well, here I want you to focus very well on what is going to happen because there are many tricky lines, but I want you to observe them because it's not only about learning how to play against d6, it's also about learning all these typical tactic ideas that can happen against most of the moves black can play. So I want you to learn the patterns and the typical ideas because they can be really helpful for other positions in this line Raptor variation. So let's say black plays d6 here. In this position, we're going to play rook b1. And the main idea is that as black did not play g6 and tried to escape over there, the queen is going to be trapped basically in every single line. So, for example, there are some options here like queen a3, queen a2, or queen e5. We are going to take a look at the three, and you will see that black is lost in all of them. So, for example, queen takes a2. Well, here we have this move knight c4. And this is really strong because now we are covering b2. So the queen is trapped here. We are playing rook a1. There's not too much black can play in this position. Maybe they can try queen a4, but then they are falling for one of the most interesting traps in the line. Here we can play, if If you want, you can pause the video and try to find it. Here we can play knight takes d6, check, and after pawn takes knight, we have a fork, bishop b5, queen takes bishop, we get the queen, and as you can imagine, white is winning in this position. The other line is when black plays here queen a3, and then we are gonna play bishop b5 check, controlling the squares on the a file. Once they block, well, we are ready to play knight c4 here. And then again, the queen is in trouble. They probably want to give a check, because if they capture the pawn, they are losing their queen directly after rook b2. So probably they might give a check on c3, but this is not going to solve all the problems. Here we just play king f1, and the idea here is that we are playing knight e2 and getting the queen either way. They might try g6 now, clearing g7 again, but it's just too late. Here we are winning. We have a really nice move here, another tactic idea. We can play in this position the beautiful move e5, and this is an interference. We don't let the queen go back, but this is not only the interference, it's also there's a pin here. We are playing e6, getting that knight. So that's why this is so strong. It's a double attack. I mean, it's a two threats at the same time. So d takes e5, we play knight e2, and well, this is a good game. The queen is trapped. There's nothing black can play. Observe that this knight is key, controlling all these squares at the same time. Well, that's the line where black plays queen a3, and finally I want to talk a little about this line queen e5, because it's also really nice. Here we can play knight f3, as you can imagine, just developing, getting a tempo. They can try to go back to c3. Observe that f4 is not available, as you can play rook h4, and one more time the queen is in trouble. They still have bishop g4, but we can play g3. And even if they try this idea, like queen takes g5, because if we capture, they are getting our queen. Well, we don't need to capture immediately. We can give a check first, and this is going to be a big problem for black. If they move the king, we can just take the queen, and then we are forking and getting the rook. If they block with the bishop, they are just losing the queen directly. So probably they want to block with the knight. However, we have another really beautiful combination here. We can just take the knight on d7. They need to capture with the king, and then white to move, white is winning. We can play here rook takes g4, attracting the queen to this square where it's going to be on the same line as our queen, and then we have it discovered. We can play here knight e5 check, and we get the queen on g4. One more time, decisive advantage for white. So in this position, after knight f3, queen f4 is not going to work. They might try queen c3. We continue rook b3. Again, the queen has to move, running all over the board. Queen a5, and one more time there is another special move here. It's a typical move in Raptor Variation. We have already seen it in some other lines, and it is this idea g6. The idea here is that after f takes g6, weak squares over here. Also, especially f7, because we are going to connect the knight and the queen over those squares, and this is just going to be winning. We can play knight g5 here, and well, let's assume some knight d7. This is interesting because if we play queen f3, they might be able to play knight e5, defending and attacking at the same time. However, we don't need to play queen f3 directly. We can be prophylactic about this idea and play bishop b5 first. Even if they play a6, wanting to get rid of our bishop, we don't need to move the bishop. We can just continue with our attack. We can play queen f3 here, and there are real threats. I mean, serious threats here. If they capture the bishop, we have mate in 2, check, and a beautiful checkmate here. But also if they don't, like if they want to move the king, trying to escape and trying to avoid some of those mates, we have a beautiful tactic again. We can play knight a6 check, not letting the king escape, and then white to move, white is winning here. I will say it very soon. Feel free to pause the video. The move white can play in this position is going to be the amazing rook takes h7, and after rook takes rook, we will have checkmate here, queen takes f8. If you guys have any question, let me know in the comments. If you want to see a game where I played Trompowsky Attack and won with a nice tactics, check out this interesting video. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thank you so much, guys. Like, subscribe. See you on the next.